Here's Ben Shapiro to make a bunch of statements about the supernatural that don't make sense, and to ultimately admit that they don't make sense.
What I think is an atheist delusion is that it is possible to live ideologically purely in a way that does not rely on fundamental faith principles. When I say faith principles, I'm not going to make the claim that those faith principles are direct from Sinai or that those faith principles require the New Testament, for example. I'm going to make the claim that there are a bunch of principles upon which we base ourselves that are external to what we know about nature and evolutionary biology, and that many of the things that Alex does in his daily life, for example, are going to be things that rely on principles that are external to a philosophy that would assume a lack of the supernatural, a lack of the extra natural. So some of those principles, for example, are free will. So every day we get up, we believe, virtually all of us, whether we say we believe it or not, we actually act in ways that betray the idea that we believe that we have control over our own actions, at least to a certain extent.
If folks who believe in free will were to just say that some of their actions just happen for no reason, I would accept that as being at least plausible. Quantum physics shows that not everything that happens in nature is purely determined. Ben seems to think that a lack of determinism somehow requires the existence of something supernatural or extranatural. But we see a lack of determinism in quantum phenomena all the time, and these phenomena are entirely natural. The issue I have with a lot of folks who say we have free will is that they often refuse to admit that if our actions are not caused, if they are not determined, then they happen for no reason. They want to insist that their actions are not determined, but also that they have control of them, which is to say that they determine their actions. Which is it? This is a contradiction.
And that control makes a difference in the world.
To say that our actions make a difference also steals from the language of determinism. Somehow Ben doesn't seem to recognize the fundamental contradiction in saying that our decisions are not determined, but that we control them, which means the same thing as saying we determine them, and that those decisions make a difference, which means the same as saying that they determine a difference.
And that's what gives us purpose. It's what allows us to wake up in the morning and make the decision to do what we believe is right or what we believe is wrong. That the principles of right and wrong are external to evolutionary biology. So
my behavior is determined in part by what my conscience can or cannot tolerate. I don't see right or wrong as having any further meaning than that. How is acting according to what my brain can or cannot find tolerable in any way external to biology?
Both of these principles that I've mentioned already, free will, right and wrong, these come from a language that is external to the Darwinian language of evolutionary biology. If you're talking about free will, there is nothing in nature that suggests the ability to make a decision free of environment and genetics in combination.
Does Ben think that quantum indeterminacy is magical or supernatural? Now, I'm not convinced that quantum indeterminacy plays a role in cognition, because the evidence for that just isn't convincing to me. I see no mechanism in our biology that would allow quantum phenomena to have macroscopic consequences for how our brains function. However, I'm open to being convinced that there is, and if you could show me how this works, I would admit that there is some element of indeterminacy in our decision-making. But if this is the case, there's still nothing supernatural going on, and also it would contradict rather than support the idea that we are in control of our actions, because indeterminate events are by definition not under any control.
In some sort. The same thing is true of right and wrong, the idea that there is a right and there is a moral wrong that we can reason our way to. Another principle that I think that you're obviously very big on, it's something that you rely on all the time, your entire podcast is based on the idea of reason.
I don't think you can reason your way to right and wrong. I completely agree with David Hume when he said that it is not contrary to reason to prefer the destruction of the whole world to the scratching of my finger. Hume's point was not that there's no difference between the two, or that it doesn't matter which you prefer. His point was that which option one ought to prefer ultimately cannot be decided by reason. What one considers to be right or wrong is a matter of one's values, and not a matter of facts of any kind.
These ideas do not exist in the context of a purely materialist atheist universe.
Non-deterministic events absolutely exist in a purely materialist universe.
Now, I'm not going to make the claim that I can prove that it's God who's behind those things, because one of the principles of faith belief is that I don't understand God.
If you don't understand God, then how do you believe in him? I don't believe in a God because I have no idea what a God is even supposed to be. I don't know how to believe in things if I don't even understand what it means to say that such things exist. God makes no sense to me, and apparently makes no sense to Ben either. Where we apparently differ is in the fact that I don't believe in things that make no discernible sense. But Ben thinks there's no problem with believing in things that make no discernible sense.
So for people who don't believe in God, that's an easy way out, right? That's an easy way out for people like me, because I say, well, I don't have to explain the relationship between God and free will because, frankly, I don't fully understand God.
If you want to convince somebody of your position, I don't see how the fact that you don't understand the thing you're espousing relieves you of the burden of proof.
But that's not really that's not really an open window. That's just part of pretty much all faith systems, is that if my mind were the mind of God, then I would either be God or God would not exist, one of the two things.
Why would your mind need to be the mind of God in order for you to understand God? My mind doesn't need to be Ben's mind in order for me to understand Ben. Understanding a person doesn't require you to be that person.
So the idea that reason makes a difference in our lives, that we can reason our way to propositions, and that's more than just saying a few magic words and that's setting off a few neurons in somebody else's brain in a naturalistic way, that there actually is principles of truth, another concept that comes from the extra-natural world, that these principles exist. So far I've mentioned free will, good, right and wrong, reason, and truth, right? All things that we consider extremely key in our daily lives and that Alex considers key in what he does.
I suspect what I mean by truth is very different from what Ben means by truth. When I say that an idea is true, what I mean is that it is an idea that consistently, falsifiably, and most parsimoniously seems to match experience. I use the word truth to describe a correspondence of an idea to experience and observation, so it therefore is entirely dependent upon experience and observation. There's nothing about that concept of truth that is in any way incompatible with naturalism or materialism. Ben talks about truth as though it is some kind of immaterial entity. I have no idea how that makes any sense.
I assume why you get up every morning, or at least why you feel you get up every morning.
In other words, it's what determines that he gets up every morning.
You know, what gets you up to do your podcast? It's because you want to say things that you believe are reasonable, are going to convince people to act in a better way, or I assume not a worse way.
Gee, it's almost like such a want is determining his behavior. And also, if determinism isn't true, how could one's behavior have any consequences for the behavior of others? To believe that what I say or do can have consequences for the behavior of other people is to believe that my behavior plays at least some role in determining the behavior of others. It presupposes determinism. If people's behavior is entirely free, then there would be no point in trying to influence anyone's behavior because everyone's behavior is causeless. Causeless decisions, by definition, cannot be influenced.
That get people to change their lives in some way, in a self-motivated fashion. That's not merely in a sort of Pavlovian response to circumstance and environment.
How do you get people to change their behavior in a self-motivated way? If people change their behavior because you got them to, then that's the opposite of self-motivated. To say that I got someone to change their behavior is to say that I motivated them to change.
So if I were going to talk about the atheist delusion, that's what I would suggest is the delusion, that an atheist can use terminology that is drawn from a world that is external to atheism for itself.
Ben, you keep using words like control and make a difference that draw from determinism. You keep using deterministic concepts to try to deny determinism.
I mean, you said a moment ago that you don't think you can establish God's existence through reason alone, but assuming that you do believe in the existence of free will, you think it's a real thing that you have.
Yes.
And simultaneously saying that if there is no God, then free will makes no sense.
Yes.
That does read to me like an argument for God's existence, such that in order to either say that there is free will, in order to say that there is free will, one must believe in God. And that does strike me as an argument for God's existence.
I mean, to slightly curve that, or to kind of sand off the rough edges there, I would say that the argument I made is an argument for something extra natural.
Sure.
Now, you can call that God or not God, but the thing that I'm making the argument for is that you cannot get from a materialist Darwinist universe to free will.
This shows that Ben has been conflating atheism with materialism and Darwinism. He seems to think that they're the same thing.
The real question that I have, and this is what goes to the question that you were asking at the beginning, before the sort of pre-question question, which was the good of religion to society. One of those goods is people believing that their free will matters and this actually is a useful thing. So I believe that it is deeply important for people in society to believe that they have the capacity to change themselves and to make different decisions than what biology would drive them to do. So you say, well, it's biology that drives you to get out of bed in the morning, which...
Why would it matter whether biology gets you out of bed or your soul gets you out of bed? If getting out of bed isn't just a random, spontaneous act, then it is, by definition, a caused, determined act. If it is a random, spontaneous act, then it's not something you control.
It's almost Calvinist in sort of the way that it's described, right? It's like you're predestined to get out of bed in the morning, so thus you get out of bed in the morning. But the reality is that we are constantly making decisions as though those decisions make a difference in the universe?
Right. Because I believe in determinism, I believe that my decisions determine other things in the universe. That's what it means for them to make a difference. The idea that we can make a difference requires determinism to be true. My videos can't make a difference in how other people think unless they play at least some role in determining how they think. If people's thoughts are completely free from any causation, then there would be no point in trying to convince anyone of anything. Nothing you say to anyone could have any causal influence over their beliefs or behavior.
And what social science actually does tend to show is that when people believe that they have control over their own actions, and when they believe that they're capable of changing the way that they live, they do make those changes with more alacrity and in better directions.
Which is why believing in determinism is good. I can't have control over my actions if they are spontaneous, causeless events. It's a contradiction to say that our decisions are causeless, but also that we control them.
Then if they don't believe that, if people tend to believe in a deterministic universe, they do act worse. So it may work. This is going to be sort of Straussian in its implications, but that may work for you. You're a very high IQ individual who can somehow reconcile the idea of living a very purposeful life with the idea that actually there's no purpose to anything. But for the vast majority of people, that is not actually how they live. And I would suggest that even in your daily life, you don't get out of bed in the morning thinking, man, my biology is driving me this morning to get on the bike, have a great day, the sun is shining, that's my biology doing this.
These are literally thoughts that I actually do have every day. In fact, my belief that I have control over my actions is predicated on these thoughts, because ultimately, my biology is me. To say that my biology causes me to do something is to say that I am causing myself to do it.
We can simply ask a question of any kind of mental activity, and this will be regardless of whether it's material or immaterial. That's what makes this a crucial argument, and an important one, a pertinent one, is that you can ask of that mental activity, is it determined or is it not? That is it determined by anything else, or is it completely undetermined by anything? If it's undetermined by anything, then it's random, and you're by definition not in control of that which is random. If it's determined by something, then it's either determined by something further inside your mind, or inside your brain, or indeed inside your soul, or it's determined by something external to your brain. If it's determined by something external to yourself, I should say yourself rather than your brain here to rid this conversation of any implicit materialism, exterior to yourself, if that's what's determining the action, then clearly you're not in ultimate control of that action. If it's something inside of yourself somewhere, then all you do is push the problem back and you ask the question again, is that thing determined or is it indeterminate? So indeterminate, it's random. Determined, you keep going back until you either terminate in something outside of the self, something, or I suppose something undetermined and therefore random, either of which you are completely out of control in.
Well, you're in control in the same sense as a lieutenant is exercising control when she gives a command to an ensign because she was, in turn, commanded to do so by her captain.
If you say that it terminates in something like a soul, people like to do this. They say, well, look, with a religious philosophy, we have the benefit of introducing a soul. That doesn't solve anything. Because you still need to, it's not a matter of having to explain the mechanism by which the soul brings about actions. That may well be a mystery. But if it is the case that whatever it is that's doing that is either determined or it's not, and that if it's not, it's random and therefore out of your control, and that if it is, it ultimately terminates in something outside of yourself or something random, and both of which are out of your control, free will cannot exist.
The idea of free will only makes sense if one admits that it would mean that at least some of our decisions are nothing more than random, spontaneous outbursts that occur for no reason. If free will exists, then you can't really say that you make decisions. That, too, steals from the language of determinism. If you have free will, then at least some of your decisions would simply happen on their own, rather than because you make them.
Suggests uncaused decision-making, and you've just excluded it through your own philosophy.
Uncaused decision-making, I suppose, is a concept that I think is unintelligible. And therefore, if there is an unintelligibility of the self on atheism, I suppose the thrust of the criticism that I made to essentially every point you made in that video, except for the argument from motion, is that what you're saying to me, if it applies to atheism, I think simultaneously applies to theism as well.
How so?
An uncaused decision. I mean, what is the process by which a decision is made?
But now you're falling into the same sort of argument that I excluded at the beginning, which was I said that the beauty of religion is that there's a bunch of stuff I don't understand. So I can't explain to you how the uncaused self makes decisions.
Well, then I can't explain to you how the uncaused self exists on an atheistic
But you have a
framework.
burden and I don't. Meaning that
I don't think that's the case.
You do, though. I mean, the simple fact is that you are the one who's claiming that a reasonable materialist universe is the cause of all. And so if that's the case, you do have to explain the mechanism in a way that I certainly do not. My entire philosophy rests on the positing of an entire realm of things I don't understand in terms of their interaction with the world. Now, as I said at the very beginning, that leaves me a giant escape hatch.
Escape hatch is a very flattering way to describe what Ben is really employing here. A more accurate term would be cop-out. When caught in the inescapable realization that what he's saying doesn't make any sense, he effectively insists that his views don't have to make sense because God is mysterious. To everyone who helps me out on Patreon, you're a big help. Thanks so much.